Welcome back. As the MTA struggles with fare evasion, plans to begin a new initiative called the Bus Stop Hub approach could potentially be used to catch and fine passengers who refuse to pay. However, many people would prefer to take an approach that fights for fair or free transit fares. Senior organizer for Riders Alliance, Danna Dennis, joins me to explore how these new tactics from the MTA could impact New Yorkers and the possibility of a fare-free New York City. Danna, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Kibin. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing okay.
Now, can you provide an overview of the Riders Alliance mission and some of the work that you do?
Sure. The Riders Alliance is a non-for-profit grassroots organization. We're made up of subway and bus riders from all across New York City, and we try to fight for what we call transit justice. We look through that lens in three different ways. Justice to us would mean having faster trains and buses, less delays, more accessible stations, or fully accessible stations, actually, because at this point, we're just over 25% of our transit system, and just making sure that riders are getting what they pay for and are able to afford the transit system.
Now, you were on one of our shows back in 2019. Could you explain or tell us a little bit more about the hashtag Expand Fair Fares campaign?
Yeah, that was probably just as Fair Fares was rolling out. And here we are years later. And now we're talking about expanding the Fair Fares program. So Fair Fares is a discounted MetroCard subsidy at the New York City level that is offered to any rider that is a resident of New York that is between the ages of 18 and 64. That rider needs to make at or below the federal poverty line as far as their income. And it's pretty low, right? So it means a single individual needs to be making around $14,700 or less, and a family of four needs to make $29,000 or less. And if you know anything about New York and our, rising rent costs and everything else that we're juggling to afford here, it's a pretty low rate. Yet we're very happy about the program. It's had quite great success. We have over 300,000 riders that are enrolled in using the program. And so that's been good. But our call this year has been for the mayor to expand Fair Fares program, right? And so while the program is great and the subsidy is there, we haven't been able to really hit the mark, and make a dent in terms of the riders that are most transit dependent and need it right now to be affordable. And so in our call to expand it, we would love for the mayor to double the eligibility rate. So it would mean that a single individual making up to $29,000 could qualify for the program, and a family of four making up to $60,000 could qualify.
Now, why do you think this is still an issue we're having in the city? As mentioned, this was like back in 2019. It's been several years. Why are we still having this problem in New York?
In terms of affordability?
Yes.
Well, that's a layered question. I will stick with transit. I think there are, many reasons why people are still struggling, right? So like other things around them outside of transit have kind of gone up. What I love to say is that a low income rider is they're carrying a weight of poverty that is something that they have to hurdle through long before they get to the turnstile. So we think about, well, why can't this person put money on their MetroCard? What does the $275 or now $290 mean to them, right? With the recent fare increase. But it means quite a lot if I am already struggling to put food on my table. I'm struggling to pay tuition. I don't have my medication. I don't have childcare costs, right? So I'm juggling all those things. And then I get to the turnstile and it's like, well, where would it come from in my budget? So I think that's why it's still going to be an issue pretty much.
I think that stress is now going to be added because, as you mentioned, the fare is even higher. It's almost $3. And the MTA just announced the presence of Eagle Team officers at bus stops to address fare evasion. How effective do you think this tactic will be? And what potential challenges do you see happening because of this?
Yeah, so just as I just mentioned, like riders, in terms of the Eagle teams are already facing all of these hurdles, right? And I think that folks are understandably a little, shaky about that. They're like, well, I can't afford this. And now I'm kind of being punished for a crime of poverty. I think it's a real opportunity for the mayor to focus on making sure that the fare is actually affordable for riders. We know that the fare went up. And for some people, an extra 15 cents may not, for many riders, they may not feel it. But for the most transit dependent, right? So the Black and brown rider, the immigrant rider, the single parent that is trying to pay for childcare, the person that can barely afford to get on the train and bus as it is, that 15 cents, they can already feel that impact. They can see places where they can put that money back into their budget.
And I also want to ask, are teenagers expected? I never knew this. I think most teenagers have their school metro, but those don't work on the weekends, or, if they already use it to school, they can't use it again. So are they expected to pay? Is that something that parents have to think about as well?
Yeah. So student metro cards and discounts, I think, go up to the age of 18. And so that's why we have an income age bracket for fares, which is 18 to 64. So there's a senior subsidy. And then there's also a subsidy given to folks who have qualifying disabilities. And so students wouldn't be impacted as they would get their metro card, those in public school and private school who are, not doing undergrad. Now, if you're a college student, that is something that you have to think about. Yeah, they would be impacted. We encourage those who fall within the Fair Fares income bracket to apply. They can apply through HRA, which is the city agency that sponsors the Fair Fares program. They can go to the website, the app, and hopefully be able to qualify. But yeah, it's something for them.
Now, how do you perceive the implementation of AI technology that's being used to track fare evasion on the subway? I know that sounds like pretty alarming to a lot of people, and I understand that it is actually already being used. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that? And, how do you think that's going to affect New Yorkers?
Yeah, I think that so there's two folds to that, right? Like, people hear AI and they get tense. Understandably so. I will say there are some benefits, and then there are some things that make people pause. So one benefit that I can highlight in that is, using artificial technology to have this kind of surveillance, granted, if the surveillance is actually going to protect people's privacy, because that's always the layer, right? Like, well, how intrusive can this be? So let's say that it actually is protecting people's privacy. It can be a benefit in the fact that it would limit a lot of unnecessary contact between riders and police officers. We don't want to always have those interactions where people are being enforced. Specifically, as I've mentioned, that the most transit dependent are people who are from communities of color, low income, and usually, if we don't have to have an unnecessary summons or ticket given to someone, that, could be a benefit. One thing that I would say make people pause is, the MTA is coming out of this moment where they just had a huge financial crisis. A lot of us have, and are still coming out of what has, impacted us in ways of COVID. And so now that we've seen this investment in the MTA on the state level, we want to make sure that the money and funds that are available are being used in the right way. And so it's kind of hard, I think, for riders to see a time when, they're investing in surveillance when we're like, well, can you be investing in service levels going up? What riders really want out of transit is to make sure that they're getting to work and school on time, that their bus shows up in time on a scheduled manner, and their train as well. So we'd love to see more of other things in transit spaces, I'd say.
And I also want to add to that, because of some of those concerns, people were shocked to see that the price did go up. And I can imagine it's only going to continue to go up in the future. Can you just talk about how that's going to impact New Yorkers just long term?
Yeah, I would say that this is one of the reasons why, again, we are calling for the mayor to expand the Fair Fares program. This is a moment where folks can have the double of eligibility. Right now, that bracket is so low, and many things are going to go up. It is not just, our trains and buses. Like we said, we're hitting kind of housing, roof levels, food. I mean, I go into the supermarket and I'm like, ready to cry. I'm like, I walked out with 2 bags and I spent $100. So all of these things are weighing on us. And I think that it is a moment where transit has had many years of kind of pausing and not had an increase. And now we have this very small increase to some of us and major to others. So we are calling for the governor and the mayor to kind of look again and say, what can happen with Fair Fares? How can we help people? Doubling the eligibility would take us from where we are now with 300,000 riders, just over 300,000 riders enrolled, upwards to 1,750,000 riders being eligible for Fair Fares. That's a lot of people in New York that we could help.
Now, I also want to talk about, because I know that you mentioned the mayor and even the governor. Sometimes people often think like the MTA is this like single thing that's on their own, but how much does the mayor or, the governor impact some of the work that the MTA does, and what power do they actually have in that regard?
Yeah, that's a really great question. That's a big part of my job, is making sure that riders understand who runs what and what their power is also as a rider, because I just want everyone to know you do have power as a rider. There's power in your voice. But in terms of transit, so when we look to the subway, when we look to, reliability, more elevators, things like that, that is where we point to the governor. She runs the state, she's over the budget, and also the agency itself is under the state as well, right? So in the board, she has the most appointees on the MTA board. So that's important. When we talk about the buses, though, that's really a combined effort between the mayor and the Department of Transportation, the DOT. The mayor has the power to speed up buses, to enforce bus lanes. We're fighting locally here in the Bronx, even for a Fordham Way busway, on Fordham Road, excuse me. And, if you're a Bronxite, then you know just how important Fordham Road is to this local area. So across the city, we look to the mayor to kind of handle that. And riders need to know the difference. You're right.
So I'm so glad that you clarified that for us. So thank you. Also want to talk about the concept of a fare-free bus route. It's gaining traction. Can you just talk about the reality of that? I know everybody would love to live in a world where, the fare was free. But can you just talk about, what's going on with that? And is that something that we could actually see in the near future?
Yeah, I think, in this past budget, so just to be clear, each borough in New York will get a free bus route. I don't want to name all because I'm not going to say I remember all. And I think folks are really excited about this. This was a moment where this came out of the budget, where we were also fighting for frequency, and we're able to win a lot of that on subways. People are never going to shy away from the idea of something being free. I think what riders also want, in addition to buses being free, is buses to come on time, right? We want to make sure that buses can cut through the traffic. And certainly we're not opposed to that happening, but we don't want to wait for a bus for 40 minutes and 30 minutes. We need to make sure that it's dedicated and, I can get there. Any of us have ever waited for a bus for more than 20 minutes. You know that you're exposed to the elements. You're in the cold. You're in the snow as we're approaching the winter. You're in the heat, like a hot day like today, right? Our seniors are on buses, folks with walkers, strollers, and we need to make sure that these people don't stand at the stops, pile up, and they can get to where they have to go as well. It's important.
Well, Danna, I want to thank you so much for joining us and having a conversation about something that affects almost every New Yorker. So once again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kibin.
To keep up with the Fair Fares for All campaign, please go to their website at www.ridersalliance.org. We've come to the end of our show today. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us and you, the viewers, for tuning in. If you missed any part of today's show, you can catch the recable cast at 5 and 10 p.m. on Optimum Channel 67 and Verizon Fios Channel 33, or watch anytime on the web at bronxnet.org. You can catch a brand new episode of Open with Darren Hymie on Wednesday and with Rena Valentine on Friday. I'm Kibin Alleyne, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.